So, welcome, friends. This is the Sunday afternoon call. It's 4 o'clock in Thailand. And this is the UK call, which means that it's timed for people in the UK and also Europe. Most of the people in the US are um, nodding off or sleeping. I think Christina's possibly the only one here from the US. She's up at 5 a.m. Um, So the last question that was asked was about positivity. In fact, the word was used was um, toxic positivity. In other words, a lot of people, in fact, when we were talking about in the sutta, we have the duality or the reverse concept of unwholesome versus wholesome, especially in the sense of unwholesome mind states, unwholesome thinking, unwholesome feelings, and unwholesome body postures, as opposed to wholesome. Now, invariably, people will change those two from a wholesome and unwholesome into positive and negative. And we want to make sure that we are not going to do that, because we're not talking about in the sense of positive and negative. We can actually talk about um, negative in a very wholesome way. And we can also talk about positive things in an unwholesome way. An example of that, by the way, of a very positive, negative thing would be there's nothing there. There's nothing to it. That's when you say there's nothing there, that's a pretty negative statement, but it's also very wholesome. So, what would be positive that's toxic? The answer to that would be if it's not true now, but you hope it's true in the future, then that would be toxic positivity. That if it's not true now, that wholesome would be that which is real, which is, in fact, easily enough to be seen directly as the reality of the situation are true right now. Like, for instance, everything is okay. And somebody comes in and cries and say, no, things are not okay. My girlfriend is dying. Well, dying is things that happen. Calling it a negative thing means that you just feel bad. But a positive thing would be you can handle that. Actually, that's wholesome. You can wholesomely handle negative things that happen. The example that I would use, in fact, this is something that comes out of a whole industry of books are called self-help books. To where the teachings of the Buddha is not trying to help, and it's not trying to self. So self-help actually is wrong in two ways. One is that we're not trying to help, because help is actually, you would expect it to be working on the symptoms rather than working directly on the disease. So Buddhism, the teachings of the Buddha, is not help, it's cure. And that, in fact, what is being cured of is the delusion of selfishness. And so self-help books then are backwards in two ways. Now, in these self-help books, they often have things called affirmations. And so the image is that the 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl is standing in front of the mirror saying things like, I'm a beautiful girl. All the boys will like me. Now, guess what? She's saying those things in the mirror because she read it in an affirmation book and she really doesn't believe it. that in fact, while she's saying I'm a beautiful girl, she's also looking at the blemishes. And so she doesn't trust it. This is why we call it toxic. Toxic affirmations, toxic positivity. A better thing for her to say is look into the mirror and says, I'm okay. I can make it through the day. Everything is all right. I don't have to listen to anything those guys say. This would be wholesome because it's based in reality. And if she doesn't like the way she looks, she can change that into, I don't like what I look like. I got to go buy some makeup or some, get plastic surgery or something. She can, in fact, say something wholesome like, at least I don't have to look in the mirror. Because she doesn't have to look in the mirror. In fact, monks in the time of the Buddha and since then have always avoided mirrors. That in fact, in the Patimokkha, one of the minor points in the Mahavagga, mirrors were not used. They were frowned upon. But there was a particular reason back then for that, and that is that almost all mirrors in the time of the Buddha were polished metal. Well, polished metal, especially polished metal, is valuable. Now mirrors are really, really cheap. But over the centuries, they've been expensive pieces of metal. It was only in the past 400 years where they could class glass. And even 150 years ago, glass, as it was cast, was so distorted that it didn't make good mirrors. It's only, let us say, basically in Jerry and my lifetime, that glass mirrors were reliable. And so we don't need mirrors. In fact, that's one of the best things about being a monk all of those years is that I didn't have to I didn't have a mirror. I didn't have to look. So if people think I'm ugly, that's their problem, not mine. I don't have to look. So there's that idea then about the girl who's looking in the mirror, lying to herself, thinking that she's ugly while she's telling herself that she's beautiful. That's pretty toxic positivity. Now, there was a book written back in the 1950s by Norman Vincent Peale, who was a preacher in New York City in one of the big churches. I forget which church. And he had the book on the power of positive thinking. And believe me, it's a Christian book. So you can see that in that regard, hope is generally toxic. It's a toxic positivity. Now, what we mean by that is that things are bad now, but just you wait, Jesus is going to make things better. That's toxic positivity. The fact is that everything is already okay right now. Jesus has already done his job and left. Things are okay already right now. So that's the whole point about positivity is that it's always dealing with something that actually doesn't exist, and that is generally based upon hope for the future, which means that toxic positivity actually supports the bad feelings of this particular moment. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions about this so far? Anybody?
Yeah, I'd also say thoughts that uh, are toxically positive often are thoughts of wanting to believe something. So the example of the girl with the mirror, she's essentially saying, I want to believe that I'm beautiful, or the common affirmation that is used is the parking space. I want to believe that I will get that parking space. These are the type of affirmations that people will tell themselves. But if we look at a wholesome thought, we can notice that the belief doesn't need to be there. We don't need to say, oh, I want to believe things are okay. Instead, we can just look and we can say, yeah, things are okay. This is all right. We're not trying to convince ourselves of something that isn't true. We're just looking at the reality of what is true right here and right now.
So, Timo, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to see the difference. It was hard for me, at least. I can say sometimes, like with these things, because there are always aspects that are uh, that they have in common, like positive thinking and having wholesome thoughts have something in common, that it leads you away from unwholesomeness, maybe. Like for example, I will get a parking spot and you're driving happily instead of, oh no, I'm not getting a parking spot again. It's gonna suck. I have to walk hundreds of meters, whatever. So in that sense, it works in turning away, but it turns you towards something else that is again maybe unwholesome. So it sets you up for a certain failure and so on. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, the thought that I just had is that wandering around in your car, looking in parking lots and on the street and all kinds of places. I remember one particular time when that happened, way back in the 1970s, and I didn't have the skills then that I have now. Wanting that parking space and magically believing that there is going to be one, rather than having driven around one full time and not found any parking. Probably the wholesome thing to say was, wow, this is not the best time to come shopping, and I probably don't need it anyway. Let's go home. Save my money. Save my frustration. I'll go shopping some other time. That would be wholesome. But positivity, toxic positivity is going to keep you in that parking lot, keep you in that district, looking for a place to park. So, if there's no more questions about that, let's move on. Someone had a question about AI, and I'll talk about AI just a little bit. First off, the name is incorrect. It may be artificial, but it's not intelligence. And let me explain to you what I mean. Many test questions on an IQ test do not test IQs. What it tests instead is pattern recognition. That in fact, pattern recognition was what AI was called way back when in the 1970s when it was getting started. So, pattern recognition means that we can see certain patterns emerge. And the experiment that we had at that time was having a matrix that had a lot of X's and Y's and Z's and numbers in it, and that we had to eliminate stuff through mathematics to come up with a wine glass that was hidden in that picture. And so that's basically all that AI is, coupled with a huge search engine. But it doesn't have any intelligence to it at all. Now, as an experiment, a happy experiment, I pulled on, at that time it was Bing, which is the AI that Microsoft has. And I'll give you the context of the situation. The last time Jesus was actually in Jerusalem 2 or 3 times. He was there when he was 12 years old. He was in and out when he was younger. But when he was preaching, he went. That's the show of him coming in on a donkey because he had to ride the donkey, because this was possibly the last time he would ever be in Jerusalem. And somebody rode a donkey back in the Old Testament. And so in order to fulfill the prophecy, he rode a donkey into town. Now, once he got there, he was only there for a couple of days before he wound up going to the temple. And he didn't like what was happening at the temple. And so he wrecked the place. How many of you know that story? They call it money changers. I'll call them bankers. To where the scam is that the temple only accepted gold coins that were given, that were printed probably long before, but most people were using Roman money, and there was other kind of money. And so in order to give a donation to the temple, you had to convert your money into the kind of money that the temple would take. Now, these bankers were right there in the temple. And he saw all of that graft and what was going on, and he said something like that this is the temple of the Lord, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. The story is that he took a whip, which is called a cat of nine tails, and started slinging it around, knocking over the tables, throwing all the money on the floor. But the story doesn't mention the fact that there was some backhanded dealing going on, to where someone would come from inside the temple with a great big bag of these gold coins, and they would sell them to um, the bankers, the temple dudes, and they would take that money then and make that exchange offhand, and then sell the coins, because there wasn't enough of them anyway. And so they kept selling the same coins over and over and over again. And Jesus didn't like that business at all. And so he wrecked the place. Now, that happened within the same week that he was crucified. So you could see that Caiaphas, the head priest, and the bankers got together, all pissing and moaning, and didn't like at all what Jesus had done. That in fact, like a gambling table, you only have a fortune that you may have not counted that's in your pile of chips. Can you imagine a gambling table being overthrown, and who now knows who owned what chips, what coins? And so they were really pissed, mostly because they couldn't agree with each other. How, if they knew exactly how much money they had, they could pick it up off the floor and everything would have been hunky-dory. But oh no, they were really ticked off because they couldn't figure out who owned what. So I asked AI about this, and setting it up through several things, and then the AI would not come to the logical point that the bankers did not like what he had done and considered that a kind of a treason, and so they put him up for treason with the Romans, so that they could get rid of him, because they didn't want him destroying their business. But the Christians, because Jesus says you have turned the temple into a den of thieves, they think that it was actually okay. So I'll take a poll right now. You think about it. Did he actually commit a sin or a crime or malfeasance, or he did something wrong by turning over those tables? Now, I'll give you an option. The option would be that he could have, the Buddha could have gone to Caiaphas and says, "Hey, I tell you what, why don't you move the bankers outside of the temple so that you can occupy the whole place?" Possibly the answer to that is it would have been more difficult then to hide the transaction of the gold coins coming out of the temple going across the parade ground to where the bankers were set up in a tent. It was actually easier to do the scam by having the bankers in the temple. But the point is that when I ask and I cross questions, and the AI could not come up with anything other than what was actually written in the scriptures. In other words, there was no intelligence there. So let me take a little poll now that we've asked. Timo, what do you think? Did Jesus do any wrongdoing in the temple?
I mean, it's relative. What do you mean with wrongdoing? Like illegal in the sense of a certain, in a
Let
certain
us say, in
frame.
the sense that he made people mad, very
Yeah,
powerful, rich people. He made them mad.
yeah. In the sense of that there was an unwholesome action, guided by positive thinking.
Okay, an unwholesome act. All right. How about you, Paul? What do you think? Was that a wholesome act on Jesus's part, or an unwholesome act?
Perhaps, yeah, acted out without thinking through, or without, maybe there were better options that could be followed.
Excellent point. He could have had some better options. How about you, Karwan? What do you think?
Really sure. I don't have a wise opinion.
I can barely hear you.
Well, I said I am not really sure. I don't know. I don't know what to think about this.
All right. But with that, I don't know, you probably would remain with that, I don't know, all the way up into the trial itself. Can just take that neutral position, I don't know, but you're not there banging your drum for, I want this guy killed. So, Mr. Bean, what do you think?
I say it's entirely possible. Like, it's still possible to today that if you tick off the wrong people, then consequences can happen, and possibly that's what happened to Jesus.
Okay. And yet, because of the scriptures, the AI could not go past what the Bible stated. That was as far as it would go. It would not go into the intelligent point that we're making here, of being able to decide what is right and wrong based upon how much damage and suffering he caused. That they wanted him killed because of treason. Yes, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, it depends. Sorry, go ahead, Karwan.
No, you go ahead, Jerry. You go ahead.
Okay. Well, it depends what he was looking for. I mean, if he was, as turned out, looking for martyrdom, well, that was a good way to get it.
Yes, that's the point.
If he was looking for martyrdom, which he was, I mean, really, what Pontius
Couldn't
Pilate
find anything better than to piss off the most important Jews in Jerusalem.
But what Pontius Pilate should have said is quite simply, look, this is a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
Take the guy out and whip him for causing a public nuisance, and send him away into send him home to Galilee or wherever, and get him out of here, and don't make a martyr of him, because that's just trouble. If you're the Roman administration, having martyrs is trouble. You don't want that.
Okay, so I agree with everyone that said something here today about this. And the point is that the AI could not come to any of that. It could only print back out to me what it read. And since the only thing that it had to read was scripture and stuff done by, let us say, religious politicians, the AI defended the crucifixion of Jesus based upon the fact that he was, on the cross it says that here is the King of the Jews. To where Jesus didn't claim the King of the Jews, even in front of Pontius Pilate. He didn't claim the King of the Jews. In fact, he told Pontius Pilate, that's what they all say. That's what you say. But he didn't actually claim anything, nor did he start any rebellion against Rome. But in fact, that was what they didn't like about it, is that he was not a politician. He was not a warrior. He didn't get a group of terrorists together. But he really did mess up, unless you take the position that Jerry stated, was who said maybe that was his plan, was to become martyred. But I'm making this point in the sense of pattern recognition. The only thing that AI can do is match patterns. There's no intelligence there. Now, a lot of AI tests are testing the student's ability to match patterns. I don't know if any of you have seen the really rough IQ test about a bunch of boxes, and as it rotates around with the various groups, you can see the boxes moving, changing color, changing shapes, changing angles, etc., like that, and you have to figure out which is the next one on the list. Or that they'll have a group of numbers, and you have to figure out what's the next number on the list. All of that is merely nothing more than pattern recognition. True intelligence takes something a whole lot more. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the one thing that humans have that AI will never have, you could call it feelings. You could call it a sense of what is right and what is wrong. You can see when things are dangerous and whether they're not dangerous, to where AI is nowhere near developed to do that. What I'm saying is that so far, with all the research, with all the Grok and ChatGPT and Bing and all of the rest, at best, what they are as large language model, which is nothing more than pattern recognition. And we have been doing pattern recognition with computers, also slowly way back when, since the 1970s. And there has been no research done as to actually put actual intelligence in there. Now, here's the point that to make. Now that we know and have established that there is no intelligence in AI, that all it has is the ability to spit back that which it can see. That's all it can see, and there's a whole lot of stuff that it can't see. In other words, it can spit back the text of a video, but it can't spit back the text of a video that it hasn't seen yet. Humans can do that. We do it all the time. Once you saw one Star Wars movie, you knew them all because you used intelligence. So, with that, we can say, well, what is going to be the future? The future is that most jobs, almost all the jobs that we have in Western society, or actually anywhere on the world, is pattern recognition. How many of you actually have a job that requires intelligence? Even writing code is nothing but pattern recognition. That you plug this in, you change that around, and you come out, and then you get the answer that you want. It's all pattern recognition. Doesn't take any intelligence at all. And that's what AI is good for, but it's going to replace probably somewhere between 30 and 50 or even more of all the jobs. An example of that would have been 100 years ago, 150 years ago. almost all employment was done in farming. Now less than 3% of employment is done with farming, and almost all the work that's done in farming is done by machines. In fact, the latest trend has been doing machines not to plow, but to harvest, not to plant. They've been planting with machines forever. But then they got Mexicans in the United States to depict the fruit because the human fingers were delicate enough to not damage the fruit. But now the machines are sophisticated enough in their pattern recognition that they can actually pick strawberries and whatnot. So the jobs are going to be replaced. Another issue of pattern recognition would be full self-driving. It takes absolutely no intelligence at all for a car to drive itself, full automation. But it does take one heck of a lot of pattern recognition to be able to recognize what's on the video so that you don't run into it. To be able to recognize where your lanes are so that you can stay in them, etc., like that. But there is no intelligence in full self-driving. But it's going to replace an awful lot of jobs because those jobs don't require any intelligence. All the jobs require is pattern recognition. So, does anybody have an idea? Santiago, I'll pick on you. What is intelligence?
Saying things as they are.
Well, no, that's pattern
Looking-
recognition.
Well, got no idea, to be honest.
That's intelligent. That's an intelligent answer. You see, AI doesn't have that ability. It has only the ability to spit back what it found. It cannot come to, there is not enough information to answer that question. That takes real intelligence. So, Jesse, do you have anything to say about this?
I agree with you. It's all pattern recognition. My previous job was basically doing that, working in computers like you're talking about. And I can see that that will go away. So I agree.
So that leaves humans finally to be intelligent. We've been overused in pattern recognition for all of history, with intelligence not being used at all. Now, what the future is going to bring, I don't have a clue. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the AI, they do predictions all the time about what's going to happen in the future. So let us say, in fact, what is predicting the future is nothing but pattern recognition. So, Carl, good to see you. What do you think?
Hello. I actually have something to add on. I recently was listening to this interview, and this lady was asking the crowd, where are all the new thinkers? What happened to the philosophers and all the men who brought ideas forward? Now we're just like kind of regurgitating the ideas. That's like what everyone is doing, just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So there is nothing new being kind of brought forward, because the new requires that sense of feeling of not knowing and functioning from that not knowing state, like kind of like an artist does. Yeah.
That's a very good point. Let me restate it in this way. In the old days, even before they called it philosophy, there were thinkers that were trying to come up with answers that required real intelligence to answer, and many of them wrote books. Your modern philosophers don't do that. What do? They read old philosophy books. They're not doing nothing now. Modern philosophers are doing nothing but pattern recognition. They're not actually thinking through the issue. This requires real intelligence. So who else can I pick on? Maybe how about you, Red? You just joined. So let me ask you this question. What is real intelligence?
Uh, from what I gathered from the input hypothesis, yeah, the one that I just dipped my toes for like 4 or 5 years with the hypothesis that Gresham brought forward 45 years on, and from all the language systems that we have in a kind of complex way. And I'm not pretending to say that I know, I'm not an expert, that not being me being an expert on language acquisition or anything, but I dip my toes enough to think about that a little bit actually, and having the ability to see those pattern recognitions and to remix them in a way, because that was really quickly that was a really quick question. I have my consideration that I have in my notes somewhere. So you have your ability to do inquiry about the environment, and you see those patterns, you see those symbols just manifesting in nature, or we do our own symbols. It could be alphabets, could be anything, and we can remix and we can convey some something that will be true about them. What was the thing from Aristotle? What was it? The solitary testimony. At least you can say that you saw something happening, some phenomena, and much better than any AI can actually do. When they get close, it's like just copying humans on that point. So I don't know if I can't fulfill that answer right now.
So we can then do some summing up by saying the following, and that is that for a long number of centuries, we misunderstood what intelligence was, that it wound up that most intelligence that we thought was intelligence is nothing but pattern recognition, and machines can do pattern recognition a whole lot better than humans can. But that's not intelligence. That intelligence requires something else. And in fact, this is basically the distinction then between ordinary people who were caught in pattern recognition versus one who is noble-minded, which is actually using intelligence to see by looking deeply, not into what the suttas say, but are looking deeply into the reality of the situation to see that the patterns that are matching are merely nothing but patterns that match, and that we go beyond that. And so this is a good reason why I wanted to do AI first as an introduction to the next topic, but I spent so much time on it, we don't have much time. So never mind, let's go for it. And that is
Can I add 10 seconds of my bad for cutting out? Can I add 10 seconds of consideration into all this? It looks like those intelligence would involve a sophisticated meta interface of language in the brain, like more developed than most animals, and we in a level that we got actually. Oh, those are my 10 seconds. Thank you.
Let's define, as an example of what we're talking about, you could say that we use the word wisdom, to where in fact that's another word for real intelligence. So the scene is coming from my childhood, early teens, out. My dad took me with some of the men that he knew in town to go out hunting. And that there was an old man who had his shotgun under his left arm, pointed downward, but not directly to the ground, so that while he was talking and moving around and waving that gun, he was pointing at various people's kneecaps. Now, the gun didn't go off, but the possibility was that that gun could go off and it was pointed in just the wrong direction at just the wrong time. That guy could lose his knee. All right, now we're beginning to understand that what wisdom is seeing how things are going, not exactly how things are, but we can project a little bit into the future, only a little bit. So this is really what we're meaning by wisdom, is the ability to see how things are headed, how things are going, as well as how things actually are. But most people are, let us say, having their head buried in either their feelings or the sand, and they're not really looking closely enough to all the things that are going on to be able to see how things are heading. And so this is where the real teachings of the Buddha come into play. You could actually say that he may have been one of the very few intelligent people in history, and yet I would predict that he probably wouldn't do very well on an IQ test. Why? Because IQ tests are testing patterns that we have nowadays, but he was looking at the patterns of the way that the mind works, as well as seeing how things are heading. So, in that regard, he could see that there really is no self. There's just the machine. Now, we have been trained as a we, as an I, as an individual. In the 18th century, 19th century, they had a phrase called the ghost in the machine. Because the machine was complex, it appeared to have intelligence to it. An example of that would be an old style player piano, but that piano can only play one song until you change the roll. And the only songs that it can play are those that have rolls for it. It cannot be creative. AI has not gone any further than that. It's just a player piano. All it has is the videos that it watches and the text that it reads, and it can do a great job of putting that stuff together, but there's no intelligence there. Where the Buddha had something new going, because he was trying to answer a question that had never been actually properly asked. In fact, there's good evidence that while he was on the search for those 6 or 7 years, he didn't have a clue about what he was looking for. He had to figure out that, oh, it is humans' dissatisfaction is what he is actually looking for to cure. And so when he came up with that, he also in the point came up with the Four Noble Truths. But the Four Noble Truths were actually known in Ayurvedic medicine for the body, but he applied it to the mind, so as to come up with the concept that there is a cure for the spiritual disease. That's that third noble truth that is so remarkable, is that there is a cure right here, right now, for the disease that you have right here, right now. And if you can cure that disease now, next time you catch it, you can cure it again. So when we get down to it through the deep inspection and come to the point that there is no self, which is stated in the Dhammapada and other places in the short phrase of Sabbe Sankara Anicca, Sabbe Sankara Dukkha, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. In other words, We can construct things and then watch them change. We can construct things and wind up being disappointed. But no self is in everywhere, constructed and unconstructed. Nowhere in the world, anywhere in the world, is there anything that has a unique quality of its own. Now, Nagarjuna with Malanda used the concept of a chariot. And he asked permission from the king, and the king gave him permission. And so he ordered the various military people and attendants around to take that chariot apart, take the wheels apart, take the basket apart, take the tongue apart, take the straps for the horses and all of that, and placed it around. Where is the chariot? The answer to that was the chariot was always in the human mind, and that's the only place that it ever existed. There is no such thing as chariotness. They do not appear in nature. But guess what? The things that appear in nature also don't have an inherent quality. There is no such thing as treeness. And in fact, things that are trees, there's ranges of trees. They don't exist as trees all the time. Sometimes they're seeds, sometimes they're lumber, sometimes they're something else. So there's no such inherently something that's everlasting that is a tree. So that there's no trees, there's no self, there is only dissatisfaction because we want things to be real. I would go so far down for those who understand a little bit about chemistry and physics that there is no such thing as a hydrogen molecule, because hydrogen molecules get stripped of their one electron quite often. And there's nothing there but a floating proton. And then it gets another electron. This is why electricity will flow through hydrogen, is because hydrogen is not always hydrogen. Water is not always water. That in fact, they know now that the sunlight that pounds on the top of the ocean out at sea, there's enough energy focused in a small enough place that actually oxygen is given off and hydrogen is given off. Electrolysis is natural, which means then that water does not have an inherent quality. It's just a passing thing. There's no actual self there. Wow. Well, if that's the case, then, Christina, what is there? Use your intelligence now. What is there? If there is no inherent self anywhere, what is there?
I'm going to say nothing.
Yes, that's exactly correct. There is nothing there because everything is temporary. Everything that we think is an innate quality, like that chariot, turned out not to be the chariot. Our cars are actually not cars except when we call it a car. So here's a little thought experiment. Let's have a brand new car coming off of any particular motor assembly line from any particular imagination, and bring it out and set it in the field, and let's start taking that car apart. Upon what time in your mind is that car, once it starts losing its components, is it no longer a car? You can take the engine out, still looks like a car. Take the wheels off, still looks like a car. Take the seats out, take the steering wheel out. But what really looks like a car is actually just the body of the car. But that can be taken apart too, and there's nothing left of a car. There's nothing there, except in your own mind. Well, if that's true, if there's nothing there except what's in your own mind, then who you are is nothing but what you construct. You made that shit up called me. Isn't that amazing? If you use your intelligence, you figure out that there's really nothing there. If there's nothing there, then why care? Why carry around something that's heavy when in whatever it is that's heavy, you made that up? You created that heaviness, and now you're carrying it around. Why not drop all of the heaviness? This is the actual cure for the spiritual disease, is to start seeing that there's no reason to carry stuff, that we can put it down, put the self down, set it down. It's not there. Now, ultimately, what this actually means is that there is no inherent self in anything, then there is inherently no meaning to anything. In other words, what's the point? The car is the point, but if there's no car there, then what's the point? The point is that there's no point. Doesn't exist. And here we have all of these philosophers going out looking for the meaning of life. And life doesn't mean anything. It comes and goes. There's nothing to it. Which leads into my best joke. When people come and said, I've had this experience or that experience in meditation, my answer will generally be something like, you ain't seen nothing yet. And what they get from that is that means that there's something that they haven't seen, rather than the reality that what they do see doesn't exist. You ain't seen nothing yet means that you haven't actually peered through the veil to see that there's nothing behind it. And yet, look how many meditation techniques and whatnot are trying to get people to go to this jhana or that jhana. They're trying to attain this. You got to go deep into meditation. You got to get that insight. The only real insight that you'll ever come up with is that there's nothing there. That's the real insight, is that you made that shit up. That doesn't mean that you can stop making shit up, but it does mean that when you do make it up, at least you know that you made it up, because it's really not real, not inherently real. Even the Four Noble Truths are only noble, they're not existential. But they're noble because they're long-lasting. But they remain noble because the mind becomes noble, because the wisdom is there to see right through even the nobility. There's nothing there. So the example that I would use is that the aristocrat, all dressed up in good, fine clothing, is walking down the dirt road, because they didn't have pavement back then, and he winds up seeing two farmers fighting with each other. It's been raining on the road, so they wind up in the mud in a wrestling match. Is the aristocrat going to jump into that fight? He's going to get muddy? No, he's going to stand there and watch the fight. He's not going to get into it. So this is what we mean by the noble, is that though we can have the appearance of seeing a mud fight in front of us, we don't jump in. There's no reason to get involved with it. We can stay outside. This is why I use the term often of just enjoy the show. You don't have to become a player. Shakespeare said something like, all the world's a stage and every one of us is a player on the stage. But we made that up. And not only that, but everybody on stage doesn't really know their lines well enough, so that they've got a book out. That book is, by the way, of what we call our set of rules, rites, rituals, how things are supposed to be and whatever. And we stand up on that stage reading our script. So the first thing that we can do is stop reading the script and look around to see that all you have is all of these people who are reading a script, believing their script, thinking that the script is them. And then the next thing we can do is we can exit the stage and go sit in the audience and just watch the show, because there's really nothing there for you, because you don't really exist. All you are is just blood, sweat, tears, if you do that. But that's all there is. The physical components, the mind is there, functioning as the mind, but the mind can be trained to not feel bad. And when the mind recognizes that everything is made up, all that heaviness is made up, we can stop carrying it around. When you recognize that you made that shit up, you know you made it up. You don't have to cling to it. It's just there. Here it is. You made it up. It passes away. Everything that comes will go. No reason to cling to it or hold to it. This is the real teaching of the Buddha, and it does require intelligence to be able to see that there's nothing really there to it. There's nothing inherent. The car is only a car because we call it a car. Hydrogen is only hydrogen when it fits the definition of what is hydrogen, which is a mental concept, not reality. Reality comes and goes. It's not there. So this is what nothingness is really all about. You haven't seen nothing yet. When you really see that there's nothing there, now the Buddha actually used this as an analogy. The analogy was that he took Ananda to two places. One in the woods, when he was out in the forest, there's no village there. Can you see that there's no village there? Then he took him to a sala where the monks eat, when at a time when the monks were not there, and reminded the Ananda that the monks are making a lot of noise. There's clamor, banging of bowls, movement and stuff like that, as well as the monks and the bowls themselves and the robes. But at this particular moment, they're not there. This will actually, if we can use this, we can begin to understand how we're doing in our own spiritual journey, our own process, because when we start, we begin to look for the unwholesome and then change it to the wholesome. But what happens when we go looking for the wholesome and it's not there? There's nothing there. Now we begin to have real wisdom. There's nothing there. And so this is how we begin to look at defilements. The defilements are not there right now. While we're looking, they disappear. They're not there. They only come back when we're not looking, which means they only come back when we imagine that they come back. So in a real way, there's kind of a catch-22 here, in the sense that we can say that real intelligence is imagination, but a better way of saying it is that real intelligence is imagination that knows that it's imagination, that it's not real, that we made that stuff up. And that's real wisdom. So, Christina, what do you think?
I think I understand emptiness, and I can see it when I drop any thoughts of greed or anger or hatred, or I can see it and I drop it. And that
Then after that, can you see that you dropped it and it's not there? The greed and anger is not there.
Yeah.
That's the
and it simmers
liberation.
out and it feels good. Yeah. Yeah. But I think what happens is I'll notice the start of the emptiness, or what I understand emptiness, and then time will go by and I'll wake up in the mud. And then I catch it. So
and then we can get out of the mud. We only know when we only can get out of the mud when we recognize that we're in the mud. And when we come out of the mud, then we know we're not in the mud.
Yeah.
So, Santiago, what do you say?
It's great. That's all I can say.
Nothing to it. Carwan, how about you? What do you have to say?
Dhammarato, to be honest, I have heard this, of course, before from you. I don't see how does that get to liberation. I mean,
Well, when you see that you're carrying a bunch of crap and you don't have to, you can set it down. That's the liberation. The liberation is that you don't have that disappointment anymore, that everything is okay. That's the liberation.
basically that the dukkha is same as the example that you gave with the car. But there is not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That you made it up. And we spent our whole lives making stuff up, but we didn't know that we were making it up. This is the real intelligence then, is to see that everything that you ever thought of, you made that up, and you don't have to anymore. And come to the fact that there's nothing there. There's nothing to it. I just made that stuff up. Now, many times we can see that what we do make up is wholesome. And if we're going to teach others, we need to teach it from a wholesome place. That I've even said recently that the Buddha made up the Four Noble Truths. He made that up. I'm glad he did. But I also know that it was just made up. But it is liberating to finally put down even the Four Noble Truths. There's nothing there. Wow, what a relief it is. There's nothing there. So this is the way of looking at it, Karwan, is that you are actually free and always have been. You just didn't know it. So start to look at it. Start to recognize that everything that's meaningful to you doesn't have to be meaningful to you. You chose to make it meaningful, to where, in fact, things don't have any inherent meaning.
But they do seem to be so real. I mean, real as in the sense that I look real. A car looks real.
It sure does.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. Is the very first fully automated manufactured car was the Model T. Does the Model T Ford look anything like a Maserati?
I do
So
know
why
how
do we call them? Huh?
I assume they look different. I don't know. I don't know that specific car, but probably they look different. Yeah.
All right. Now let's go back before then, because the first Model Ts that rolled off the assembly line were not the first cars. That in fact, the first car, you could go so far as to say, with a child's tricycle with a little bit of a motor on it, probably a Stanley steam engine. And it looks somewhat more like a child's tricycle than it does a car. But that was the beginning of them, so they evolved, they changed, they didn't stay the same. And the same thing with our human intelligence. So that now we think we know what a car is, but we don't know where it came from or where it's going. This is the problem with AI, is that all it has is the information available to it, but it doesn't even know that that's all it knows. It can't stretch out and see things any beyond that. So that's what I'm inviting you to do, Karwan, is to look at the fact that a car is not a car. It's just a car in your mind. And it's not much of a car when it breaks down, because the whole point of being a car, in fact, we can go into a little bit of system theory. There's still several points about system theory, and one of them is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So you have all of these car parts, and when you put the car together, what do you have? You have, what is the car's intention? What's the car's purpose? This car is transportation, right? So that defines the transportation defines what the car is, not the shape or the design of it. So if the engine goes bad, or even if there's no fuel for the car and it does not have transportation, why do people keep thinking that it's a car when in fact it has the most important ingredient missing? And you can say, well, I can go add that ingredient. Yeah, but if you do, now you've added back to that system, and now it's become a car again. Because it does have transportation when you do put the fuel into it or repair the engine. So this is what we do, is we deconstruct the mind to begin to see what are the constituent components of the mind. And when we do, we begin to see that it's only constituent components, that there is no ghost underlying any of that stuff. There's no reality to the self. Doesn't exist. The body exists, but it only exists for a short time because it's got all the constituent components. But that's going to fail pretty soon. Everything is temporary. And if we cling to it, in fact, a lot of people don't like getting old. They want to stay young so that they can stay fit and so that they can stay strong, so that they can protect the me. They want to preserve the me, which means when they get close to death, they don't like it at all. Now, the freedom from that is let the body fall apart. That's what the body does. Don't be attached to the body. Let it fall apart. You can be happy. You can control the feelings. And so this is why we would say more practice. Practice more. Practice looking at what's there and what's not there. Begin to see what's really we thought was real, not real, not there. We assumed that it was there. So, Joseph, you just joined. Do you have any comment? Jesse, how about you? Do you have anything to say?
Yes. So I really like the car analogy because I feel like I can apply that to literally everything around me and take it apart that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that the car is only a car because it's got all the constituent components that your mind requires for it to be a car. Your idea of a car is what a car is.
Or what I
So
am.
good. Exactly. Because you're that car. So, Timo, do you have something to say?
Back to AI. I think there are many differences, but one of the important ones seems to be with this that it's AI can only let's say judge, like it's judgment, that there's no looking. There are rules that says when you see this pattern, then you have an output, then it's this, and so on. And I think basically it comes back to that it has no sensuality. So there's like the way it's only intelligence, but intelligence is not wisdom because it doesn't have the looking aspect. It doesn't have senses. It has only judgments. It has only patterns and no input, no genuine input like that is observable.
Say that there's no overall concept or design. All it has is input, like the ancient computers. Back in the 1960s and 70s, we had a famous phrase, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. because all you have is the patterns that mix the garbage that came in, and you're going to have garbage go back out. AI is still stuck there, but most of humanity is still stuck with GIGO. It takes real intelligence to take the GI in and say, wait a minute, this is a bunch of nothing. And therefore, there's nothing to go out. There's no GO. Ben, do you have something to say?
Good talk, Dhammarato. Thank you. Yeah, I think it can be. Life gets a lot lighter to the extent that the stories are seen through as not being real and not being something serious that we have to take seriously. But Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talked about the self that's not a self, where there's still a sort of conventional self that we can discuss. Like we don't need to stop feeding the body because we think, oh, it's not really real. It doesn't need food. That'd just be stupid. But we can still use conventional terms whilst realizing that ultimately it's just stories. And there's nothing that needs attaching to or clinging to.
So there's a few people that I haven't talked with yet. Tim, what do you have to say?
Hi, thanks for the talk. Yeah, I think AI might be a selfing machine. Yeah, creating meaning and says that was an interesting point from you, I think. Yeah, would you agree to say that this self is also just a pattern? Would you agree to say that the self is also just a pattern?
Yes, most of everything that we do is just a pattern.
So everyone who believes in a self basically has the same pattern. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Giannis, do you have something to say?
Yeah, that I guess the mind doesn't have to, but it likes to fill in the
Didn't catch that. Can you repeat that again?
I wanted to say that I guess the mind doesn't have to, but it wants to fill in the.
It's in the habit. It's part of the
Yeah.
stuff that we made up. Mm-hmm. All right. Does anybody else? Jerry, do you have any final remarks?
The microphone on. No, sorry. Thank you for the talk. I have nothing useful to
add. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody have something to say? Yes, Paul, go ahead.
It seems like being in a satisfied state, it's easier to see this as a process and easier to be in the moment. Whereas in a dissatisfied state, there is always the push pull of greed, ill will, and delusion taking us out of this present moment as well. Yeah.
So, Mikey, why don't you take this home?
Yeah, thank you, friends, for being here today. This was a lovely talk, talking so much about nothing. An easy way to apply it is, just have that attitude of there's nothing to it. When there's a story that comes up to the mind, we can say, "Oh, there's nothing to this story." You know, there's nothing to these things that we want and that we crave for. There's nothing there. We can deconstruct them, just as Dhammarato was saying with deconstructing the card. So yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, share this video around. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and whatever your favorite podcasting platform may be. And you're welcome to come join us here in the Hangout channel, here on the Dhamma Friends Discord. It's been really nice to see people just popping in here whenever and hanging out. People like Mr. Ben, Anasis, Santiago, Timo, Paul Matt, Arwan, all sorts of people here have been just hanging out and chilling and talking about the noble Dhamma. So you're welcome to come join us and make some noble friends. Thank you all.
Thank you all. So
Thank you.
there's
Thank you.
nothing to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Dhammarato.
Thanks, Dhammarato.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye bye.